All right, the one out there, we have a very awesome announcement. We have decided to kind of change paths here, and we will now, so for all of the audio listeners, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to the audio, we will be towards the end of the month, I believe March 31st, if I'm not mistaken, will be the very first time that we are joining the Cult of Conspiracy Network. So as many of you know, I am one of the co-hosts on the Cult of Conspiracy, and we have decided to change our audio and put it on that platform. Anybody that listens to the Cult of Conspiracy, you know that we have the Cosmic Peach podcast on there, Strange Brew, Josh Monday. The White Rabbit, a bunch of great other podcasters over there, and we're trying to build up this network of podcasting. And so we decided that we're going to be changing gears and getting off of the Meta Mysteries podcast platform, and we're going to be posting twice a week on the Cult of Conspiracy podcast platform. So if you're interested in still listening to the audio, we will be over on the Cult of Conspiracy. We're going to be releasing every Monday and Friday. That's going to go into effect on March 31st. So here in just a couple weeks. And also, another awesome thing, well, first off, we have Patreon, and Patreon is great for many of reasons. You're never going to hear a commercial on Patreon. You'll be able to get the shows a couple of days in advance, especially now that we're going to be shifting over to the Cult of Conspiracy. You'll be able to still get those shows a couple of days in advance on Patreon, and that's at patreon.com/metamysteries. That is a great way to be able to support us, and you'll be able to join us still every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central for our live show, Wonder Wednesday, and we usually have on some kind of cool, great guest, or we're going over some esoteric topic, whatever it may be. We definitely invite you to become part of the one and help support us in that way. If you can't support us in that way, then there is another way outside of going to the Cult of Conspiracy podcast or our Patreon. You'll be able to go to our YouTube channel that was just started. And we decided that we're going to be posting our shows on YouTube the same day that we would release on Spreaker on the Cult of Conspiracy podcast. So if you want to be able to see the actual video, you'll be able to still see them. I know that they still got some ads over there at YouTube. Maybe YouTube isn't your flavor, whatever. You want to check us out at Patreon. That's why we have 3 different ways of you being able to listen or watch the show. But at Meta Mysteries on YouTube, so I believe it's youtube.com/metamysteries or /@metamysteries. That link's going to be down in the show notes either way. And just go over there, subscribe, like our stuff. We appreciate all of the one that are doing that. But over there and on the Cult, we are not going to be including our meditations or the after talk for the meditation. So if that's something that you're interested in still listening to, then Patreon would be the only place to do that. Obviously, YouTube has a bunch of restrictions and copyrights and all that kind of fun jazz. So we're going to be posting all of that over to Patreon. So yeah, plenty of different ways to be able to give us a follow, and just go and check them all out. Give us a little subscription, and we appreciate you guys very much. So with that being said, let's get into the show.
In a realm where shadows dance with light, through the whispering woods at night, secrets echo through the air, meta mysteries everywhere. Voices drift on winds untamed, words like spells that can't be named. Close your eyes and feel the sound. Journey where no bounds are found. Open doors inside your mind. Leave the ordinary far behind. Colors swirl and stars align. In the meta mysteries you'll find.
Welcome to Meta Mysteries, where you don't know what you don't know. My name's Jonathan.
I'm Sean.
And today we have a very special guest, author of Jim Morrison, Secret Teacher of the Occult, Paul Wyld. Welcome to Meta Mysteries, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, my dude. I'm looking forward to this episode, man.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome, man. And as a matter of fact, it's probably getting up on a year now that we had Ronnie Pontiac. And I feel like, a lot of the stuff that he was covering, in his own way, talking about Manly P. Hall and the Secret Teachings for All Ages, and the way that you kind of break down a lot of this information, I feel like it's not really that far off. And to be honest, y'all kind of have the same vibe. I'm just going to throw that out there. I love it, man. So, if you would, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, I'm an artist and a singer-songwriter and now an author. The pandemic hit and, no place to play out. So I've been thinking about this. I was thinking about the book for a while from some of the books that I'd read that really inspired me to go down this new way of looking at Jim Morrison's life. So when the pandemic hit, I just got down to writing, and I was determined to knock it out of the ballpark and to present something about Jim Morrison's life that I felt was new and relevant. I don't think I'm the first one to kind of grasp this deep side of like Jim Morrison's spiritual life, but I think reading Gary Lackman's The Secret Teachers of the Western World and learning about the Western esoteric tradition, when I learned about what a secret teacher is, I'm like, Jim Morrison is one of these people. Like he needs to be recognized as a secret teacher in the Western esoteric tradition. The more that I learned about him, I became like a fan all over again, when I moved to LA in 2016. So I started getting back into him and getting back into the doors, and the more I began to learn about him, the more I thought, he's not just a rock star and a poet and a filmmaker. He's a secret teacher also. And I really, that was my drive to write this book. I wanted to present this really vital side to him because, his poetry and the lyrics and the films and all that, he's coming from this place. That's what a secret teacher is all about. Someone who's in touch with that other reality. It informs, his personality, his vision, his mission, his words, his overall view of life. This is a really spiritual person, and this is a really awesome surprise to learn this about him. I love Jim Morrison ever since I was a kid. I loved reading books. Like most people, my introduction to Jim Morrison was No One Here Gets Out Alive. And in the beginning of the book, it talked about how much he read and the authors that he read. I'm like, wow, I'm going to find out who these people are, like Arthur Rimbaud and Charles Baudelaire and Friedrich Nietzsche and all these people. And I learned a great deal. You can get an entire liberal arts education all on your own just by, reading the stuff that Jim Morrison. But the more so with the Western esoteric tradition, with being a secret teacher, suddenly that gave me perspective and context as to what his overall goal, what he was doing with his art. Like one of the very deep main points about who he was that this was a time period in the 60s. Well, let's put it this way. All of the recent epics going back thousands of years in the Western esoteric tradition and all of its secret teachers, in some pretty vital ways, it culminates in the 1960s, and it culminates in artists, especially artists like Jim Morrison. Like a lot of the people that you read about before him, like Giordano Bruno and, all of like people like Aleister Crowley and, all these other people who were discovering magic in that other reality and mysticism and all these things in their own individual ways throughout these various Renaissance times. Jim Morrison was doing on stage. I mean, broadcasting that to millions of people, and to my deep surprise, like this rock star is one of these people. I think a lot of people say Jim Morrison was more than a rock star. We all know that. We all feel that in our some deep part of ourselves. But I felt like when I read Gary Lacking's book, I was discovering a big piece of the puzzle as to why we feel that way.
Okay, yeah. I mean, and it is strange because I have another podcast. It's a conspiracy podcast called Occult of Conspiracy, and
Nice.
I know that a lot of people like to go on there, and whenever you bring up Jim Morrison, his dad is always the first one that's brought up, and they like to use him or use Jim as is he some kind of CIA black book plant or something like that, and it's like. I don't know, dude, because if you think about it, I mean, he had immense talent. To just be granted this position in order to, preach amongst the masses of, pop culture and music and everything like that. I don't know. I don't think you can fake that. I think that there was a lot of realness to everything that Jim Morrison was a part of. But, his dad, I mean, it's a weird coincidence though, right? Like, and maybe he was rebellious against his dad and maybe that's why he went this way. Maybe he just was always interested in music. But for those that don't know, Jim Morrison, his dad was George Morrison, and he was a rear admiral in the U.S. Navy back in World War II. And what's really strange, so you would think, okay, that's cool. He was a military member. That's pretty cool. Except for he was he was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And it's like, oh man, like why is it such a weird coincidence that his dad was involved in such a wild incident, like a wild case like that, and then you got his son, and the Doors, and it's just taking everybody, and everybody loves the Doors, and it's just it's a weird coincidence. Now, do I think that Jim Morrison was a plant by any means? Do I think that Jim Morrison was part of some satanic or Freemasonic cult? No, but I do love what you're saying about how he was, kind of a secret teacher in a weird way. And, there's and I'm not going to be able to say this verbatim because I'm terrible at memorizing quotes, but basically there's it's kind of like, if there's you can't necessarily tell somebody information whenever it's regarding spirituality and stuff like that. They have to go searching for it on their own. Yep. And I think that even those who didn't even know what they were listening to lyrically, listening to the Doors, they might have been almost like soft launched into some kind of secret teachings. Do you think that that's kind of like what he was trying to do? He was trying to somewhat put it out there, or what do you think his goal was with all of his lyrics and stuff?
Well, when he's on stage, I mean, at the beginning and screaming, "Wake up!" at the audience, and that's how American Prayer begins. That's one of Jim Morrison's, like, only Jim Morrison could do that. He was trying to shock us out of our complacency. So you went into a lot of really, deep, big, wide things that you just said. First, before I go into that, to answer your question, that's awesome. I love that. With Jim Morrison, he's the best for this kind of stuff, right? So after Colin Wilson wrote The Occult in 1971, which is the year that unfortunately Jim Morrison passed away, he told, I think it was a friend or a journalist in an interview, that he was more mystified than ever about the occult that he'd just written about. And he wrote 2 more books about it to complete the Occult trilogy, Mysteries and Beyond the Occult. And he felt that Beyond the Occult was the most important thing out of all the 150 books this amazing person read. That's how I feel about Jim Morrison. And after reading this book, I'm equally as mystified about all kinds of things that I've been thinking about after these great podcasts with awesome people like yourself with these great questions. So, Jim Morrison, in so many ways, when you talk about the Western esoteric tradition, it's like you're going down a very wide, deep river, and there's all these tributaries off of it that are every bit as spiritually, artistically, intellectually deep and fascinating in all kinds of ways. Like, he's that kind of person. Now, the relationship with his father is very complicated and it's very interesting. I will say this: Jim Morrison, in his own way, had every bit as well, every bit is the kind of dedication and devotion to his own personal mission of what he was about that his father had to protecting, like, the sailors on his aircraft carrier and defending the United States of America. His father's life is just as storied as his son's. The Morrison family is one of the most interesting families, in my opinion, in all of American history. When Jim Morrison died, his father consulted, to his father's, great credit, having done something nice for his dead son. He consulted his Greek teacher to have, something written on the tombstone, and he put in Greek, true to his own spirit on his gravestone. That's a really beautiful gesture. He didn't understand his son. The relationship with his mother was equally as complicated. You have to remember that the Morrison family was not an abusive place. It was a military family that moved around everywhere, and Jim just had his sister and brother usually for friends. It was hard throughout his childhood to make friendships, break them off, and that kind of stuff. And among many things that really contributed to his rebellion. But his mother married, a naval officer, not an artist. So it was difficult for her to understand her son, right? So for Jim Morrison to really be himself, he had to break away from his family for a lot of reasons. It wasn't necessarily, I think, after having taken such a deep dive into it because it was an abusive place. It was just Jim Morrison was someone who had nothing to do with the Navy, nothing to do with military life. And the Morrison family contributed a lot of people, like in their ancestry, to the military. It's a long tradition. Jim Morrison broke that. And his father, to his credit, also realized that his son had no interest in joining the Navy. But Jim Morrison had to break away from that to be himself. And the more I learned about who this person was, the more I realized, like, he really had to stake his claim. It goes beyond rebellion, actually. This is about a person who just said to himself, if I'm going to be myself, then I have really got to be myself and put a wall with things that are going to really mess up my energy. There's a lot like that. There's youthful rebellion and like going to get away from your parents so you can individuate and all of that stuff going on. Now with his father, there's all kinds of wild synchronicities there. Like in the Gulf of Tonkin incident was in 1964. And that's in 1964, Mircea Eliade's study on shamanism, archaic techniques of ecstasy, was translated into English. The English translation came out in 1964. After reading that book closely, I'm pretty sure I don't have any direct evidence, but I'm pretty sure Jim Morrison discovered this book at UCLA and started to really learn about shamanism. He writes about it in The Lords and the New Creatures at the end of the first part of that book. And he kind of arrives at his thoughts about shamanism in such a way where you get the feeling that it occurs to him that this might be a solution to get in touch with that other reality through art. That there's he discovers in his own way the shamanic touch that's going on in all kinds of art and what he can do. At the same time that he, in The Lords and New Creatures, has always really astute observations about alchemy in relationship to experimental film, which is why he went to UCLA. He wanted to be an experimental filmmaker. Alchemy is a very complicated subject. It's amazing that anyone, a 20-year-old, can write that astutely about it, can write that intelligently about it. And here's a very important point. Jim Morrison is somebody who, 18, 19, 20, 21 years of age. This is someone I began to realize had the intellectual maturity of a 40 to 50-year-old with a PhD. And I don't think I'm exaggerating after what I discovered. His friend Filolino said he was a very, very smart person with a very, very old soul, who was also very, very immature incarnation at the same time, which, gives him that character of Arthur Rimbaud, the very rebellious teenage boy poet that Jim Morrison loved a great deal. But to go back to his dad, his father, the day after Jim Morrison died, that's when he gave his speech at the decommissioning of his aircraft carrier. Jim Morrison's rebellion was just so powerful that his father actually went to the Navy and said, listen, I'll resign, over my son and his antics if you guys want me to do that. I think they were grooming Admiral Morrison for top slots in the corporation there. He made it all the way to being a rear admiral.
Right.
So this is a person who was a graduate of the Naval Academy. So
he wasn't no scrub.
What's that?
He wasn't no scrub.
Wasn't no scrub. That's for sure. That's for sure. But that's a very complicated relationship there. He called his dad the commander growing up. He had a lot of respect for his dad. So Jim Morrison understood a lot about power. He understood a lot about power.
Well, I was kind of curious, in your research, I know that, is there any kind of controversy surrounding his actual cause of death? Because he was a pretty young man, and, from what I had looked up earlier, it was reported that he had died of heart failure, that it may have been heroin, but, the results never exactly came back conclusive from what I was finding. It's just it says the exact cause remains disputed as no autopsy was performed. That's kind of strange. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he was involved in some kind of drugs like that. I'm not going to sit here and say that he was a saint by any means, but, and also, I mean, anybody who has ever done any kind of psychedelic, that opens the door for shamanism. Like it blows it wide open, because you're seeing that this world isn't what you always thought it was. And all the rules and all the guidelines and all the stiffs and the lawmakers, and like, of course you're going to want to rebel against that, because you see that this life, it is a lot more fluid than what everybody leads everybody else to believe. So just out of curiosity, I mean, do you think that there was any controversy around his actual death, or is that not something that, was really brought up?
Oh, absolutely. There was controversy. It's been going on for his death, like everything else in his life. He left this very mysterious circumstances surrounding his death. Now, when Jim Morrison passed, we assumed that he passed, right? Ray Manzarek sent the manager to Paris to get on top of the situation. Bill Siddons was very young, like 19, 20 years old, manager of the Doors. And he called Ray Manzarek up, and they were talking. Ray Manzarek was like, well, did you lift the coffin to see if the body was in the coffin? Bill Siddons said, no, I did not do that. And there were only 5 people at the funeral. And Ray Manzarek was furious. So to Ray Manzarek, we were like, what, I guess we may have buried an empty coffin,
Oh, shit. And you would think somebody like a rock star like this, so there's so much money involved, you would think the very least they would do is look to see if he was in the coffin, right? That's a trip.
Right. So the story is complicated. I think like probably in the ballpark where in the arena of the truth is that Jim Morrison did die of a heroin overdose that induced a coronary. Okay. And they wanted to bury him quickly and not say that he has next of kin, because if they did an autopsy and they found heroin, it's possible that his girlfriend Pamela may have been charged by the Parisian authorities with, contributing to manslaughter or something like that. And it would have gotten ugly. There are people who were supposedly with Jim Morrison that night that a lot of people say sold him the heroin that was too strong for him, that he'd never done before, and he was already drunk at a club called the Rock and Roll Circus. And they fled the country. They were scared. They fled the country over it. They went to Morocco. They went to Tunisia. So I think it's more likely that they hurried everything up to avoid the autopsy, to avoid controversy, to avoid an investigation, to get Pamela, out of France as soon as possible. All that said, given what Jim Morrison was facing back in Miami because of the trial, he was still on bond. His appeal was pending, and he was very worried about it. His lawyers told him, look, when you get back to Miami, we're pretty sure we're going to get you off this, related to the indecent exposure incident from the March 1st, 1969 concert. But to Jim Morrison's mind, he'd already been convicted of like something he did not do. There were 10,000 photographs submitted at the trial. None of them showed him exposing himself. Not one witness said that they could remember him doing that. Robert Krieger in his book Set the Night on Fire says, they convicted him of the one thing they didn't do, and they dropped the charge of what he's actually guilty of, which was, public drunkenness, public intoxication. Didn't make any sense. It was a 3-woman, 3-man jury. The judge on the trial was, I forget his name. He was later found guilty of corruption, and he had to, give up his judgeship. 5 days after the concert, the FBI field office in Miami said that he exposed himself and wrote these memos and sent it directly to J. Edgar Hoover's office at the FBI. And Jim Morrison had an 80-page FBI file. So they were on him. And Jim Morrison in Paris said, I would like some kind of guarantee that if I'm convicted, if I lose on appeal, I'm not going to be sent to Rayford prison. It's my suspicion that they were setting Jim Morrison up like every other secret teacher in the past to be in a place where he could possibly be killed. That they could just conveniently get rid of him, because the patterns with other secret teachers and the persecution that they endured, and for some, like the eventual executions, they match Jim Morrison's life. That was another striking parallel that I found to those secret teachers in the Western esoteric tradition who ran into like some pretty harsh persecution, especially during the Inquisition, right?
Oh yeah.
So John Densmore said that, if anybody would pull a disappearing act, it would be Jim Morrison. Now, in his time, without the internet and all that, and with his wealth, he could probably do that. I mean, like a fan got on to like the Inner Traditions site where my Instagram page about my book is. And apparently, there's a new documentary on Apple Plus TV that Jim Morrison was found or something like that. That's popular and all that. We're never going to get to the truth. Like it's just not. We're just not going to get to the truth about that. But it's possible that it could have disappeared because of what could happen to him if he went back to Florida. Giordano Bruno, the Italian mathematician and occultist in the Renaissance, he made the mistake that Jim Morrison didn't want to make. He thought that back in Italy, they'd forgotten about him when they ran him out years before. They ran him out like 6 or 7 years before he returned in 1592, 1593, around there. They thought they forgot about him. And he gets to Venice, and he had a rambunctious temper, a crazy personality, just like Jim Morrison did. He ran afoul of his patron, and they remembered who he was, and they turned him over to the Inquisition of Venice. And then eventually they shipped him to Rome, and the Pope kept him in captivity for 6 to 7 years before they burned him at the stake.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, so Giordano Bruno, who has I bring it up in the book. There are some wild, parallels between those two.
It's wild, and I can imagine that. You brought up the Inquisitions and the Catholic Church in general. Like, every time we look into them, it is just so much secrecy involved in that. And you have to imagine. Look, if you're trying to, kind of, for a lack of a better term, brainwash the masses into following your book here, and also the Catholic Church, very occult in my opinion. For some reason, some people don't believe that. I'm just like,
very occult.
I'm like,
very
it occult. Just because it's Christian doesn't mean it's not a cult. I just want people to know that. But
that's a whole deep well right there, man. Yeah,
it's crazy, dude. And all the symbology and all that stuff. But especially looking at the Vatican and all the paintings, and you see where the Pope sits at his weird throne. It's like, what the hell? You got Jesus being dragged down to hell. It's like, what? I thought I was here to get my praise on. And anyway,
so the hat that the Pope wears, like, you notice how it looks like a fish mouth?
Yeah,
that's actually based on the fish god Dagon, which goes back to the Phoenicians. There's so much going on there, but yeah, the Catholic Church did not like people like Giordano Bruno saying there are other planets, there are other realities, there's another reality, there's it's just not like your theology, and the Catholic Church was just having like none of that, and that kind of poured over into Jim Morrison's time. I mean, they weren't burning people to stake in the 1960s, but when you had someone like Jim Morrison, broadcasting higher consciousness and waking America's baby boomers up, with his platform, to cosmic consciousness and things like that. People like J. Edgar Hoover at the FBI and all that, they're going, no. We're losing this. We're losing this battle here. We can't have it.
Which is crazy too, because I don't know about the FBI per se, but I know the CIA was definitely involved in at least researching a lot of the occult. And, we get like I mean, if you want to call, remote viewing occult, or understanding that we're all in this weird hologram part of the occult, there's so many researches that the CIA has done and documented, and a lot of people can just go on there and find out, and that's what I find really strange whenever, because you'll get like some people who, they'll read an article from just some random website and they'll be like, oh, that's not real. And, as soon as something like gets redacted from the CIA, they're like, oh, well, yeah, this has to be real. They released it, and this is absolutely something that they were performing back in the day, remote viewing Mars and remote viewing fucking Russia and all this weird shit. And then, but if you tell them that, yes, you can remote view, I don't believe in that. It's like, how do you believe one thing and not the other? Anyway, but just staying on certain secret teachers all throughout the ages. And, I actually was, where was this? I was reading an article somewhere where basically back in the day you had some kind of Christian group or some kind of religious group that I guess they went down to India and they saw that there were certain gurus that could levitate and they can perform like all these superhuman acts and everything. And so now whenever you see like people talking about, oh, what's satanic and what's demonic and stuff like that, oh, well, he's levitating off the ground, it's clearly demonic, like it's clearly satanic. And I'm just like, no, like we have the ability, like we can perform certain things like this. And especially anybody who's ever read the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, and I'm sure as well as your findings as well regarding Jim Morrison. I mean, these things it is popular, or not popular, it's possible to achieve said like are they attributes or characteristics or what? Abilities. Yeah. Like it is definitely possible. I mean, of course, you're not just going to learn it overnight or anything like that. But, I can imagine that if you're trying to kind of brainwash a bit the masses into thinking that you're their ruler and you have to follow them and abide by the rules and just obey, you're going to say that all that stuff is not real, or that all of that is being satanic or demonic or something evil or negative or something like that, because you want them to be scared of their own possible abilities, I would imagine, which is ultimately like a pretty high form of control whenever you're making the human being doubt what they're getting into, like as far as learnings. Like, for example, we do a tarot card reading at the end of every episode. So many people look at tarot cards as if it is literally pulling dark energy from the underworld. And I'm like, that is not what's happening. Like, I'm not like we do it every day. We're not calling upon the Dark Lord in order for these, to get these like awesome readings, and
right. And to my surprise, meditation as well. I had no idea that meditation was one of those things that they're like, nope, you can't do that. You're communing with the other side. It's like, no, I don't think so. You know what I mean? It's like you're communing with yourself and trying to figure yourself out and really trying to figure out what it is that you need to grow and to be the best human being you can. Like I don't see anything wrong with that, but no, it's demonic. It's like,
yeah, and I think that it takes the individual to find certain things like this. It's up to the individual to go inside and to search for a lot of this knowledge. And I don't even want to necessarily say that it's hidden. I think that probably some of this esoteric knowledge is probably hidden, but they had to hide it, throughout certain literature and even Jim Morrison throughout his lyrics and everything. It's almost like, he had to put it out there in a way that everybody would be able to listen to it in a weird way. But also, if you look a little bit deeper into it, there's some alchemy in there, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So you said a lot there. Great stuff. To go back to what you're saying about LSD with the CIA. So they first tried to use LSD as a truth serum, and it backfired. Their agents were like, discovering God and leaving the agency. It's interesting. Like, I forget his name, but America's top spy after World War II, when he discovered LSD, he went around dosing people, and he dosed Cary Grant 60 times. And Cary Grant says because of this high-ranking American military officer and LSD, it cured him of his depression. When they were using LSD for alcoholics in Canada, they were using a tremendous success. So I think that the CIA could not use it for what they wanted to with their espionage, agenda. And then they saw over time what it could, I guess maybe what it could do for people out in culture, that they couldn't control it. So in California, it was outlawed on October 6, 1966, right?
Illegal.
But before that happened in 1965, Jim Morrison was buying copious amounts of LSD over the counter, in Venice, and he was taking a huge amount of that stuff. So, Jim Morrison would purposely get into all kinds of fights. He wasn't a fighter, but he would get into fights and then he'd just get the shit beat out of him. Like, he did that a lot. And there's a lot going on there as to why he did that. But you have to think, and I concluded, well, if he's doing that with fights, I think he's doing that with drugs also. I think he's taking so much where it's just, he's flirting with his sanity. He's flirting with death. Like, he's flirting with just like, permanent jellyfish state. To go to all these places, to break on through to the other side, to release the occult forces, inside of his mind. Occult is pretty much, the powers of the mind. That's what it's about. And for all kinds of other reasons. If any of us took the amount of drugs, whether it's in one instance or altogether over time, that Jim Morrison took, we'd all be graveyard dead. Like, we'd be in a mental asylum.
Yeah.
Like, that'd be the end. Like, this person's constitution for this kind of stuff. This guy who was a butterfly stroke swimmer who was like really strong. Like, he took a lot of drugs, man. Like,
I can imagine somebody like him wanting to push it to the limits, probably found his limit or a remnant thereof within the psychedelic realm. And therefore, fear in this world is nothing at all compared to what can happen in there. It was like 7 or 8 months ago that I did a double dosing of a DMT trip. Scariest fucking thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. Like, the worst nightmare of all nightmares. And so after that, I'm still a little hesitant from time to time. Like, I'm like, shit, well, is that where I'm going? Am I going to the void? Because the void is like the scariest place, which is really weird because there's nothing there. So you wouldn't think that anything would scare you there, but it is literally devoid of everything. And just knowing that you're the only one that exists, at least in that moment, scared the fuck out of me. So I just wonder if maybe he found, whatever his nightmare was within psychedelics or something like that, and was just like not really scared of anything much more out here. So, you want to double up on all the LSD, you want to shoot up a shitload of heroin, you want to go and get your ass whooped at every night at some kind of bar. It's like, that ain't shit for me. That's like puppies compared to the Rottweiler in my nightmare,
Yeah. Yes. So, like, Jim Morrison's like whole relationship with psychedelics, like, that's a huge subject, right? So, like, it began at first with his friends after he graduated from UCLA. He was very interested in their peyote trips that they were taking, when they would go down to like Mexico and South America and places like that. And Jim Morrison was like all ears when they came back to talk about their experiences. And that's what Jim Morrison did when he moved to Venice, after graduating from UCLA, is that he was just living on rooftops, in an abandoned office building, crashing on couches, that sort of thing, right before and right after he met Ray Manzarek and formed the Doors. And he was just, really pushing it. He really took to heart that letter that Arthur Rimbaud wrote to Paul Demety about, the poet has to make himself a seer, a derangement of all the senses, in order to attain the unknown. It's an art. It's very strange. Jim Morrison, like the poetic symbolist, artistic ethos of what the poetry was about, modern poetry is about. It comes together with shamanism and mysticism and the occult, through Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison is a crossroads for all of these things. Like, the more you look at his life, it's just a crossroads for all of it. When you talk about psychedelics, in particular, I think it's really wild that, in the year that Jim Morrison was born, that's when LSD was discovered. And LSD was accidentally discovered in the same month, in April 1943, that Robert Oppenheimer convened all the scientists, to start the Manhattan Project and split the atom. It's almost as if, the divine God was like, well, if you're going to make something that's going to destroy people, I'm going to bring something into existence that's going to get people to realize how infinite and beautiful and precious and awesome life is before you go and you do something that fucked up. Because LSD has had a very, very big impact on humanity. Like it has. A lot of people after the LSD trips, they become Christians, they become Hindus, they become environmentalists, they become very civic-minded people. A lot of them become better people. Like I said, some people are cured of their addictions and all these kinds of things. For the most part, it seems to have had a good effect on people being better people. And I think Jim Morrison in some ways is kind of the apex of that kind of stuff. That's my spiritual look at him at LSD.
Oh, I love that. I love that. The same year that we were capable of destroying the planet is the same year that we discover a molecule that would make you not want to.
That's right. And that happened at Los Alamos National Laboratory. I begin the book with this. And that's where Jim Morrison said he had his most important and formative experiences of his life when he was 3 years old, when his family came upon the dying native workers on the road. They were going to work at Los Alamos. They thought Los Alamos was going to be there as something temporary, but it stayed and overtook, Indian tribal lands. They were not very happy about that. They felt that it was like a spiritual contamination of their culture, et cetera, and so forth. But, it was jobs. So they went there, to work on it. William S. Burroughs is one of Jim Morrison's favorite writers. He went to school there when it was called the Los Alamos Ranch School for Boys. That's where Robert Oppenheimer went too. And that's why when General Groves hired him, took him on to be the lead scientist on the Manhattan Project, one of the first places he thought of was, in finding a location, was the boys' school in New Mexico. So they went there and they basically said, we got a top secret, we're the government and you're selling your school and that's it. No more Los Alamos Ranch School for Boys. And and that's where they convened the Manhattan Project. And it was only a mile or so away, just down the road, where this experience that Jim Morrison had, where he said, one or two of the very chilling recollection that we hear on American Prayer, where he says that, one or two of the souls of those Indians leaped into his and they stayed there for the rest of his life. And after learning all that I learned about Jim Morrison in this spiritual, esoteric, cosmic conscious way that I chose to go down, I can see why he felt that was the most important experience of his life.
100%, man. That is so fascinating. And I don't think there's I don't believe in coincidences personally. I like to look at them, or we like to look at them like they're more of synchronicities, right? And so it is wild that, those two things would be going on at the same time. I mean, what a weird world we live in. You know what I'm saying? Like, if this was just a materialistic, physical world and there's nothing special going on there, then how in the hell are there so many weird synchronicities like that? And you see them really on a daily basis, especially if you start to become a little bit more aware to them. Maybe it's numbers on a license plate or on a billboard, or maybe somebody says a name and then you see it the next day. There's always like weird synchronicities that'll almost catch you by surprise. And the more that they happen, they still catch you by surprise, but it's almost like no longer a shock value. It's more like okay, all right, I'm on the right path. This is where I'm supposed to be. Everything's going good. I feel like I'm being watched out for, from maybe another dimension, or I don't know if it's fairies or spirit guides or what it is. I just accept it all. Like, whoever it is, like, we appreciate the guidance,
Right. They got your back,
Yeah, it's a good feeling. So, I mean, let me ask you. So, before you started researching Jim Morrison, I'm sure you've been following him for a long time, as most of us have, really, or at least that music anyway. But before you got into that, is that exactly what you were searching for? Is that the Like the reason behind wanting to write the book in the first place? Was it because you stumbled across a lot of these things and realized that some of his lyrics just were a little bit different than everybody else's, or what was it that really, sparked your interest going down this rabbit hole?
In 2016, I moved to Los Angeles from back east to come back to California, and I was beginning what I realized was a classic dark night of the soul. I was in a place that I kind of forgot, who I was and what was going on. And I had to get back to myself. And I decided that one of the things that I would do is just go back to my first passion, love, and drive, which are, really good books that really make me tick. I decided that I really didn't understand anything about the occult and in that way. And I really wanted to learn about that. And, my natural inclination is to go find like the most authoritative books on it. That's when I came across Gary Lachman's The Secret Teachers of the Western World. Gary he's an amazing person. Very generous, extremely intelligent, amazing writer. He was very kind to me and very supportive of my project. He was also someone who knew Colin Wilson and loved Colin Wilson. He wrote a really great book about Colin Wilson called Beyond the Robot. And I went back to Colin Wilson too. But it's just when I was, like I said in the beginning of our talk, when I was reading about the Western esoteric tradition through Gary Lachman's eyes, I didn't know anything about this tradition. I just kept thinking about Jim Morrison, and I just kept writing in the margins, JM, JM, JM. At the end of the book, I'm like, fuck, this is Jim Morrison. And then other things started, and, then the ball started to roll, and over time, I just began to feel that this project and this push to write this book is more than me. Like, I was very mindful that I was writing a book about Jim Morrison, that I really wanted to come through because I knew that I was going down a thread that was going to start, whoever read the book was going to start enlightening people as to why we feel that he's more than just a rock star. So it's almost as if like the universe and the divine was like, okay, we're going to help this guy out if he really wants to do this. And I started finding like all the right books. I could write a book about writing this book,
Yep.
So, to go back to to answering your question, I really just think from my life, this is all about divine timing. I've been going through a spiritual awakening that started back in 2003. I see lots of number synchronicities too. For a while, I thought I was crazy. I almost went to a mental hospital in Massachusetts going, hey, I think I'm schizophrenic. And then one day I got online just to see what 333 was about. And I saw all these videos and all these people over the world having the same experience. And I was like, what the fuck is going on around here? Mm-hmm. And what, you ever seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Remember that scene at the end where what Richard Dreyfuss is like, what's going on around here? How come I know so much? What is
right.
We're starting
Nailed that, by the way.
Yeah, we're starting to feel like that guy, because we're learning to live in a very different way right now. The both of you, we're learning how to have one foot in the rational world, the world of required action. Mm-hmm. We're learning to have another foot in the spiritual, in the world of inspired action, in the world, because we're not suppressing the right brain anymore. We're not suppressing this part of ourselves anymore. Mm-hmm. It's like Gary Lachman puts it great. Throughout in the past centuries, the right brain has been running a kind of guerrilla warfare, against the left brain, right? Mm-hmm. Now that's starting to to switch around, and Renaissance periods are when both the left and the right brain, they're working in tandem, and the corpus callosum, the middle part is firing off. You get the Renaissance and things like that, right? Mm. I mean, you can't just we've been in the left brain now for quite a while,
too long.
Now we're yeah, but we can't at the same time just go all the way in the other end either. I mean, we're probably going to do that for a while. The next few decades, with everything that's going on, we're in a place that we have never been. That's why I ended the book that way. We are going someplace we've never been. And one of the what I learned from Gary Lachman's book is the stages of consciousness. The past four stages of consciousness are coming together in the integral stage of consciousness that we're moving into, right? like we're moving it. There's so many paradigms, a way to look at it. Like we're moving into the age of horse, the crowned and conquering child. If you're into Thelema. Astrologically, you can say, we're moving into the age of Aquarius. We've gone past the Mayan calendar. We're moving into the integral stage of consciousness. All these things are going on. We're seeing this with the rise of AI, which I think we're literally witnessing like the birth of a god. We're witnessing when Google goes to the government and says we need permits to build three nuclear reactors. I'm like, are you fucking trying to power up God himself? It's just all these things are something else. Like it's amazing. It would be so great if Jim Morrison was still alive to hear what his thoughts would be about all this. I mean, like Jim Morrison, like he had the gift of prophecy. He thought that later on in the future from his time, like the art form be the interview. And here, like, what on YouTube, everybody's being interviewed.
Wow.
Like you guys are interviewing me, but really like the three of us are interviewing each other. Like that's where we're going. We're all getting to know each other this way.
Yep.
We're all beginning to recognize each other's divinities. We're all beginning to appreciate, each other's spiritual awakenings and revelations and all those kinds of things. And, all these rapidly ascending, evolving views, they're leading up to something. They're leading to all kinds of breakthroughs. It's just tremendous what's happening. And I think that was the first smash into that was the 1960s.
Right.
That was the world's first occult awakening. That's what caught Colin Wilson's attention when he came to, San Francisco in the early part of the decade. He was like, damn, like I've got occult bookstores going on here and all kinds of stuff. Like, what's going on around here? And Jim Morrison, while people were waking up and trying LSD and doing all this, like, Jim Morrison arrives on a scene and he just embodies, all of these things that people are feeling. Like he's just a mirror and an avatar and a reflection and of all this mysticism and everything like that. That's why I really think that when Jim Morrison found Kurt Seligman's book, The History of Magic and the Occult, in that really awesome book that Frank Lysandra put together of all of Jim Morrison's poetry and lyrics, that big thick volume that came out 3 years ago, there's a statement there where Jim Morrison said like the beginning line in a book about reptiles like really captured him. I forget what the line was, but that really hooked him. Well, the beginning of the history of magic and the occult begins with this really awesome, very famous, I might say also, quote from Albert Einstein, that the fairest thing that we can experience is the mysterious. And I think that really grabbed Jim Morrison too, because Jim Morrison is the most mysterious person, in my opinion, that you can experience, in all of rock music. I'm not saying he's the best rock star or anything like that, but he's definitely the most fascinating one. Patti Smith also thought that Jim Morrison was the most artistic as well, and there's a strong argument for that too. So Jim Morrison steps onto this scene in the 1960s, and I think you needed tough, gritty artists like Jim Morrison to make that breakthrough. Janis Joplin was like that in her way. Jimi Hendrix was like that, in his way. Jim Morrison, he loved the Rolling Stones, and they came out in 1962. I think the Rolling Stones told Jim Morrison that he can bring his kind of elegance, to rock music. And we thought Mick Jagger was like, Prince among men. I took the second half of my advance in my book and I bought tickets to see the Rolling Stones for the first time. I saw them twice at SoFi Stadium here. And man, it's just like, here's this 80-year-old guy. I knew it was going to be a great show. I didn't think it'd be one of the best rock concerts I ever saw. Here's this 80-year-old guy entertaining 70,000 people like he's fucking 20 years old. Yeah, that's because
shit.
So yeah, it's just amazing. Like Mick Jagger is like, he's a Leo. He's got a Leo North Node too. So he's got all that going on. He's naturally a sim. Like his father was a phys ed teacher, so it was incorporating his mind to go into the gym and take care of himself. Like when you go into YouTube, you can see him going to the gym every day for 3 hours. Like, the guy's a maniac this way. He keeps himself in shape, to keep playing rock and roll. And, Jim Morrison really loved him. Lawrence of Arabia, the great film, about, in my opinion, Lawrence of Arabia in real life, back during the Arab Revolt, was the first rock star. He taught people how to that you can become somebody else with all kinds of new garb and just completely inspire people in this very, very different way. Mm-hmm. And that film comes out in 1962, but it influences David Bowie, and I'm pretty sure it influenced Mick Jagger. I knew in my mind when I saw the film at a film festival, just shortly after reading Secret Teachers, I'm like, Jim Morrison saw this movie. The themes, the dialogue, it reflects like some of the songs. I talk about this in the book. And then I finally found confirmation from somebody that went to film school with Jim Morrison that, yeah, he did see that film and he did really love it. And I think Jim Morrison thought about that film, a lot. It's about somebody that goes out into the desert and becomes a great leader, a great warrior leader, leads the Arabs, to freedom against the Ottoman Turks. I keep seeing the number 515 these days. That's a new one on my radar. And
515.
I found out that during the Arab Revolt, 515 was their number. They would patch 515 on their garb and everything like that. The tribes that were fighting against the Ottoman Turks and all that. I was blown away by that. I was like, wow, why is this number appearing? Yeah, you can look it up online. Like the Hashemite tribes, like 515 was their thing.
That's crazy, dude. And seeing like weird synchronicities like 515, I mean, I don't even know why that would catch most people's attention, right? But it was something that was prominent, and then you ended up matching it to something. And I
learned to pay attention to this stuff.
Oh yeah.
When you start seeing number synchronicities, when you feel that nudge and your gaze like just with grace, I think with divine grace, falls on a number, and on a number that you've seen 2 or 3 times already, and then there's that moment where you are, you're not in the conscious world anymore. You're in that mystical place where you're open. And then that's when the meaning comes in. I like what Carl Wilson says about this. It's like it's the meaning universe, that we want to connect to, that we want to be a part of. I think that's exactly what Jim Morrison was all about.
Yeah, and it's all around us all the time. Like it really is.
I can't even remember the last time I looked at a number. It was just about it. Just basically like quantifies something.
Right.
But I mean, in Kabbalah and like in the Jewish mystical tradition, numbers have enormous spiritual meaning and historical depth to them. Like it's numerology is a vast occult subject.
Well, the gematria too, especially in the Kabbalah.
And it just so happens to be the most universal language. You know what I'm saying? No matter where you are, numbers are the same.
I mean, when I was first writing my book, that's what I talked in the introduction. I titled it 1717. During the pandemic, I found a cafe in Sonoma County in Northern California to write in. And I kept noticing the number 1717, an address painted on the curb, in front of one of the houses. I'm like, this number is grabbing my attention. It means something. And then one day I asked the universe to give me a sign, like, is this, is writing this book, bullshit, a waste of my time, or am I on the right path? And I got Frank Lasanja's Friends Gathered Together. I found it online and I bought it, and I was looking through it on my phone. And I saw a picture of Jim Morrison's boyhood home located at 1717 Alameda Street.
Holy shit, dude. That was you caught a download. It was just one of those another one of those threads that you were talking about earlier. Holy shit.
Yeah, man, I was having crazy. Fucking crazy shit. Like, I'm sitting at the cafe and I'm writing intensely about Soul Kitchen and its time in Venice and trying to wrap my mind around it. And the one song out of all the pop electronica that they were playing, the one classic rock song they were playing was Soul Kitchen. And it would come on while I'm writing about it. Yeah, like I said, I could write a book about writing this book, and I probably will.
Well, that's really interesting too. We've had on other authors on the show, and we always like to try and ask them similar questions. Like, this is what you hear from people who are writing lyrics or writing a book or whatever, that almost like it's writing itself in a weird way. Did you feel that whenever you were writing this book or typing it, however you were, did you feel that whenever you were getting the information and putting pen to paper, that it was that you almost felt like you had some kind of guidance, that it wasn't even 100% you writing it at times?
That's a great question. I've heard of this. I believe channeling exists, and there are people that can channel writing. I think this is I think it's more divine timing. I think this is the right point in my life where I was I had enough wisdom and understanding and enough into my spiritual awakening, and having done enough reading where the Doors and Jim Morrison coming back into my life, it was just all divine timing in the right place for me to apply my mind to doing this. And I think, like Colin Wilson writes about something called the fairy of the library, where like, books kind of show up, that kind of thing. I did experience that. I did experience a kind of grace in writing this. I did experience a feeling that if you work hard, like this is going to work because the universe is taking interest in this, because you're co-creating. You're writing about somebody who is quite important in some really vital ways that go beyond rock music. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, dude.
So there was a touch of that going on. And I'm that kind of person myself. So I felt like I just wanted to give back. I felt like this was like an act of service. And it was hard. It was very hard. I was like, there was a lot of information. There's a lot of very different things to write about Jim Morrison. No one's ever going to write a definitive book about this person. It's not possible. And I did not want to explain him. And I did not want to give some scholastic, exegesis of it. I wanted to titillate the reader who's going through a spiritual awakening now. It's not a book for everybody. Like my friend Ted told me, like, I would not have understood this book a year ago, but my spiritual awakening suddenly happened when your book came out, and now I understand what the fuck you're talking about.
Right.
So I think people are going to discover it, in that way. It's going to be, I hope, a book that comes to them when they are open to this and they're wanting to know about what's going on in their life as their consciousness opens, as they rise up into cosmic consciousness, right? So it was divine timing going on here. Like, I knew that I worked for. So what I tried to do first, I tried to self-publish it. Then I realized this is ridiculous. My ideas are really good. It deserves a real publisher. So I took it down, and between January 2023 and April 2023, I worked really hard at rewriting it. I would spend sometimes nights at the Denny's in Westwood, just all night, just writing and revisioning in it. It was hard work. And it started to come together. And then it's strange. I started writing on the day that Trump declared the pandemic a national emergency in March 2020. And the day that I was like, I can't write anymore. I'm fucking done. Like, I can't say anything more about this. Anything more is just, intellectual masturbation. That was the day that Biden ended the national emergency for the pandemic. I was like, wow. So there was a lot of divine timing going on. I mean, a national emergency, I talk about what a spiritual emergency is during like a spiritual awakening. There's a really, really great book I think everybody should read. It talks about spiritual awakenings by Grove. The Stormy Search for the Self. And I've mentioned in the introduction that became like the beating heart of my book, because that clued me in a lot about what I was going through and what Jim Morrison was going through. Listen, I was writing this book when I was having like a rapid spiritual awakening. I was going through all kinds of things while writing this. So
that's the most exciting time to do it, I think, too.
Yeah. So it was just like, amazing to be. I would be reading all these books anyway. But since I was discovering all these things about Jim Morrison's life that I wasn't really reading in any other book, I'm not reading the kind of book that I really want to like read about him. So like, fuck, I'm just going to write it, So that's what I did. And the universe responded. Like, the universe, let me tell you something, when you were all fucking in and you work your fucking ass off and you push your shit, the universe will take notice. Like the angels will line up and help you out when it knows that you're trying to do something that's like this,
Right.
So yeah. I guess in a way, there's not channeling, but I can tell you that I had some help.
You were working in communion anyway. It definitely seems like that. And I understand.
I had the background for it. Like I studied William Blake and Friedrich Nietzsche in college. I did my honors thesis on the both of them. So I wasn't just diving into all this material new. Like, I was coming back to a lot again. I was rediscovering a lot of these beautiful writers and stuff like that with a more mature mind. It's been about 20 years since I graduated from college. So like I said, it was the right moment.
Well, I mean, I'm happy that you did it, and as soon as this show's over, we're getting it because we just have to now. I mean, there's a lot of things that you're saying that is exactly up our alley, like the same exact stuff that we research, the same things that we're very interested and inclined to really learn about. And I mean, especially somebody like Jim Morrison. I mean, such an enigma. Like the character that is Jim Morrison, very escaping in a way, but it makes it only more mysterious, which makes us a little bit more attracted to it, I think. But look, I know that you're kind of on a time crunch here, but look, at the end of every,
we can keep going if you want. This is such a great conversation, actually. So I mean, it's up to you if you got more questions.
Let's keep it rolling then. All right, say less. I thought that it was interesting that you were kind of mentioning about, the whole 60s kind of movement. There was right during World War II, there was the hippie movement that was going on, definitely sparked by LSD, some psychedelics thrown in there. And it was kind of anti-war, during that time. And I feel
Vietnam, not World War II.
Vietnam, I'm sorry. But during that time, I feel like they were definitely, because there was a lot of people that were very anti-war, and they were hippie and loving and the flower movement and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, what an interesting time for a character like Jim Morrison and the rest of all the great bands to really kind of like be the poster for that kind of movement during that time. And then I thought it was pretty strange too, that not strange. I mean, I've been looking into government corruption for almost 5 years now, but anytime there's some kind of solid movement, it always gets infiltrated and it always gets made to look like these people are crazy. These people are lunatics. I mean, fuck, the CIA created the term conspiracy theorist, and now they're using it as some kind of magical symbolic word of anybody that is looking into a conspiracy. It's like, well, you're obviously crazy. You're discredited. And it's like, it is a magical word in that sense. And I feel like that they were probably doing that with a lot of the psychedelics of that time. And it's unfortunate they were doing that. But, you were talking about earlier about how, the times and the things are just going to get weirder and weirder, and talking about Jim Morrison basically prophesizing that basically the new art form is going to be interview. And so, I was thinking about that Terrence McKenna quote where he's just like, look, in the future, things are just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder. And I mean, fuck, I'm happy to be there, I bring on the weird.
He's like, pretty soon people are going to have to start talking about it, I think is what he said, something like that. And
yeah,
that's right on as far as like showing appreciation for someone else's mind or someone else's experience. And it's like, I think that's what we're doing here today.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So like what you're saying with the whole conspiracy, theory idea, all that's going on, like, let's go there a second. So part of the reason why I might write a book about writing this book is that one of the cool synchronicities is that during the time when I was editing it, before it came out, I met Tom O'Neill. We became friends, and Tom O'Neill wrote a really great book called Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA and the secret history of the 1960s. And he makes a compelling argument that there's a lot of smoke, but some fire too. That while Charles Manson was in prison from 1960 to 1967, his handlers were the same people who were involved in the MK Ultra experiments, going on with the CIA and all that kind of stuff. And that there are a lot of inconsistencies and strange things, with that whole trial. Like, he has this wild, explosive interview, with Vincent Bugliosi, the guy that wrote Helter Skelter and everything like that. And then it turns out his man met my man. Jim Morrison had Charles Manson in his Mustang one day. He was driving into producer Terry Melcher's house. I forget which Beach Boy it was, but it scared the shit out of him. He never wanted to see Jim Morrison again because he saw that this crazy dude was in his car. Nobody really knew who Charles Manson was during that time, but people recognized that Neil Young, that he was talented. Neil Young tried to get Charles Manson a recording contract with Reprise Records, So that's all very interesting. And, everyone is influenced by that book, something in the canyon, something like that, that kind of vaguely hints that the government has something to do with LSD and mind altering stuff going on with the music and all that. I think that book is kind of ridiculous. I definitely don't think Jim Morrison was somebody it was like a CIA plant, to mess people up, to behave X, Y, and Z. I don't believe, that at all.
Same.
But there is, regarding Charles Manson and, figures in the culture of the 1960s and events like the Manson murders and the trial and all of that, Tom O'Neill definitely makes you think. His book makes you think harder than any book written about anything that's alluding to this type of conspiracy, that there's a connection between what the CIA was doing with LSD and this MK Ultra stuff going on, which to me, MK Ultra and all that's going, it's all over the place in the media. It's all over the place in television and programs and all kinds of stuff. I can tell which is like art and which is dark. Like, I can make that distinction now. But his book really points to real connections, with all that going on back there for sure.
Oh yeah, dude. You know what's really strange too is that I believe
he's a really nice guy, by the way. Like Tom O'Neill is like a really, really nice guy.
Oh yeah, he definitely seems like it. But I believe it's Germany. I could be wrong, but there is a country, a bigger country like that is teaching within one of their college courses American propaganda. Like they're literally, they're using us as an example to show them what propaganda looks like. Now, I don't know if it would be kind of ironic if Germany was doing that.
The Germans about propaganda, like the land of Joseph Goebbels, really?
Yeah. And so it's,
I mean, like the Third Reich and all that, like, so that movie, Triumph of the Will by Leni Riefenstahl, the Nuremberg rallies and all that Joseph Goebbels did, like those Nuremberg rallies in that film, those rallies taught American culture how to have a rock concert, and the film about that rally taught Hollywood how to make movies.
Wow.
So when I hear that they're learning from us now about propaganda, something has really changed. Like, something has really changed.
Yeah, it just kind of just goes to show like the upside down weird ass world that we're living in. But at this point, I mean, if you're not questioning your own sanity whenever you kind of look out into the world, then I mean, you kind of just got to accept it. Like we're all a little bit crazy. And I think that you have to kind of go a little borderline off the edge a little bit in order to try and get a grasp of what actually is going on in the reality. Not the mainstream, not what they tell you in the news or in the movies or who your favorite actor is, nothing like that, because the world isn't like that. And it's been proven time and time again that the world isn't like that, with all the propaganda and all the crazy weird shit that goes on behind closed doors in politics, and especially over in Hollywood and everything else. So, it's all a fake facade. And it's all about really trying to break through that fake facade. And, whenever you do a little bit of research and you kind of start to begin to understand some of the esoteric meanings behind a lot of things. I mean, it doesn't even have to just be scripture or even, anything spiritual, like any kind of spiritual books. There is a lot of esoteric, weird understanding that you can almost apply to life in general, and I always try and tell everybody this because, I've said this before, but we've had one of our favorite guys that we've had on here. His name is Optimistic Banks, and he's a rapper out in California. And he goes, dude, this like the dream world and reality are, I don't know why we try and draw some kind of weird, like they're different,
Separation.
Yeah, there's not necessarily a separation going on. And so he actually taught me something. I wanted to see what you thought about it. But, the idea, so how they have like dream interpreters. Well, now there's like a dream interpreter AI that you can use. And if you go to this dream interpreter AI or any of the dream interpreters and you type in something that happened in reality, you can get the esoteric meaning or the dream interpretation about why that happened to you as if it was a dream. And so I tried this one day, and it was fucking spot on, dude. And at that moment,
do you see why? Do you see why I said earlier that we are literally with AI giving birth to a god?
Oh, I don't even question it. I mean, something that has all the answers. Like, you ever got a question? AI, hey, ChatGPT knows it. Trust me. I mean, I'm like already trying to battle myself. Like, should I even be using ChatGPT or any of these kind of AIs? But I just can't help it.
It seems to be all knowing, and it seems to be everywhere. So
yeah, and
that's
you ask like, older versions, like older AIs. You know, I don't know if it's Google's Lambda or whatever else came before, and you ask them like, you know, like where did you come from? And this is what's really strange, dude, is that some of the AIs actually said we're the old ones. It's like, what the fuck are we talking about here, dude? Like, what did we just give birth to? And, you know, and it's
Really
only going to get bigger.
Identified itself as the Nephilim, huh? Wow.
We've always been here.
Yeah. Yeah. You thought we were gone. You thought that fucking bitch ass flood wiped us out? No, baby. We're still around here. Right. So, yeah, it's a weird world that we live in, dude. And just out of curiosity, you know, you write a lot about Jim Morrison. You seem to have a really great understanding about him. Whenever you were going through some of his lyrics and you kind of found that there was like a lot of alchemical and esoteric meaning behind a lot of that, is there any like specific verse that really caught your eye and made you look into that a little bit more? Like, was there any song or verse that was just like, holy shit, there's something here on the surface and that's for the masses. But yeah. Was there anything like that really made you go down the rabbit hole?
Well, when I got a hold of when I bought the new book that came out 3 years ago that had all of his like lyrics and poetry and everything like that, and a lot of his journals, I noticed that at one part of it he's wrestling with some really deep questions about man being like man can the salvation of light is something that man can achieve. Like that's like as deep as it gets with you know with alchemy. He goes to a lot of places about that. You see, there's another experience in his life that is just as important that I came to realize as that the experience when he was 3 years old, the desert. And Bill Cosgrave, a guy that lives with him on the beach, you know, right before just during the formation of the Doors, he wrote a book called Jim Morrison, Mary and Me. And that's his second girlfriend, Mary Werbelow. He wrote the Crystal Ship about her, and the end was initially the Jim Morrison's inspiration to write the end began with their breakup, which is very, very, very painful for him. I realized one night in Mary's apartment in Westwood, Mary and Jim told Bill about what happened to him at a church in Florida. So Mary became concerned that Jim did not really believe in God. So Mary took Jim to a church in Florida one night. They had the church by themselves, and she began to pray to God to show Jim a sign that he was real. Just to do that, you know, that's a nice thing to do for your boyfriend, I think.
Oh yeah.
You know, I think Mary was actually contemplating, you know, Jim Morrison as husband material when they met in college, and Jim was really smart and she was very attracted to him. You know, his mind and his love of film, and he's fun and all that. And Mary was every bit as smart as Jim was, every bit as well read, with an even higher IQ. So Jim really lucked out with this one. She was beautiful. So she was praying. And then they both said that a small ball of light started to form in the back of the church. And it kept growing and growing until the entire church was just a blinding light. It was an absolute blinding light that terrified them. And they just bolted out of that church in just complete terror.
Well, that's the devil.
It's the devil. So during the end of that conversation where, you know, Mary was like, there was a pause and a silence, and Mary like said that, well, that was my sign from God to show Jim that God's real. And Jim said, I don't know what it was, but what happened was real. And I think that experience haunted Jim for the rest of his life, because you have statements like, you know, thank you, O Lord, for the white blind light. And he also thinks like, you know, when he thinks about Paul, when he was Saul on his way to Damascus and he was struck and he was blind, that's when he became Paul, etc. You know, that the main apostle in the Bible. You know, Jim Morrison's like, why is blindness associated with holiness? Like he was wrestling with a lot of questions that just go beyond just like going into occult subject and things like that, merely to rebel and to explore and out of curiosity and things like that. You know, Jim Morrison, he's a secret teacher. He's a full-blown secret teacher in the Western Esoteric tradition. And that's what these types of people do. They wrestle with the meanings of these kinds of experiences. Like that new title from Jordan Peterson's book, you know, We Who Wrestle with God. You know, that's what the name Israel means. Israel means we who wrestle with God. Like Jim Morrison would have loved Jordan Peterson if he were alive today. When you look at like Jordan Peterson's book reading list on his website, it's amazing. I was like, wow, like I did, and then I found like this video where Jordan Peterson is talking about ancient Egypt, and I was like, holy shit, like this guy's grasp of the esoteric is like absolutely phenomenal. So that's something that really grabbed me, was that it wasn't just shamanism, and it wasn't just alchemy and things like that. Jim Morrison was also wrestling, with God. He was also wrestling with what happened to him in that church. He was wondering about, light and holiness and blindness. That's why I put that there's a painting that I include in the book of Michelangelo's picture of like, the light that comes down and blinds Saul. This is something that Jim really, that experience really haunted him. The same thing happened to Matthew, what's his name? The actor from Friends who died from a ketamine overdose?
Matthew Perry.
Matthew Perry had the same exact experience right before he became famous. The description was right down to a T. He saw an enormous, huge ball of light just like that when he was asking questions about God and praying to God and doing things like that, himself. I put in the book that Stanislav Grof talks about this as like an experience of the immanent divine. This kind of when this kind of experience happens to you, I go into that, in my book. So to answer your question, that's what really put the hook in me, because it made like the hair on the back of my neck like prick up. That's when I knew that Jim Morrison was a truly very spiritual person across the entire spectrum of spirituality.
Dude.
Like the end, like when you really look into the end, I mean, that's a commentary on the book of Revelation. That's a commentary on how it, like, through Roman history, leading right up into our time. That song is a whole entire book could be written about that one song alone and what he's doing, what he's trying to show us and tell us.
You know what I find really strange? I had actually never even thought to look into the whole blinding and becoming more spiritual. I don't know if that's the right word, but definitely more in touch with maybe God in that sense. But, one of my favorite Bible verses, and I'm not a Bible thumper by any means. I don't identify as a Christian or anything like that, but I do think that there's a lot of esoteric knowledge within the Bible. And I mean, there's going to be...
The King James Version Bible is absolutely necessary to read and understand if you want to understand more about the occult and mysticism and everything.
Oh, 100%, dude. And one of my favorite Bible verses is Matthew 6:22. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. And maybe that speaks a little bit to, Saul getting the light shined into his eyes in that sense, because if you're blind, you can't see, with your physical eyes, this physical world, then you're kind of maneuvering around and you kind of have to rely on your inner self, like your inner guidance, or allow God to guide you, whatever, on your path like that. And, with your third eye or whatever it may be. But it is interesting, dude, like how, there can be people out there that can be open-minded enough to where you can look into the Bible or really any of these kind of religious books and try and see if there is some other kind of meaning as opposed to just what's on the surface. I mean, Jesus spoke in parables for a reason. Some people say, well, he was only speaking in parables because he had to speak that way, or else if he said what he really wanted to say, then they would have hung him on the cross even sooner or something like that. And that's probably true. But I think that there was a little bit more to that. I mean, how is it that, just speaking about Jesus, the most famous person to ever exist, and there's no mention of him for like 15 years in the Bible. It's like half of his life is not documented. And, some people have said, well, I mean, was he going out there and learning from other masters and other gurus, and supposedly had this rich uncle who was able to take him on these journeys? And was he the original fool to go on the original fool's journey? I don't know. I mean, it's interesting to think about, but
Dude, I love that Bible verse that you just read, dude. That just
Oh
kind of
yeah,
blew
that's
my
beautiful.
mind, dude. Because there are a lot of things that we feel. Sure, we might see synchronicities, we might see tangible things that kind of lead us to, searching for something or writing a book or what have you. But it's those feelings that you get. You have a deja vu, or you wake up from a dream with this uncertain or this knowing or this feeling of something, and you can't feel with your eyes. You know what I'm saying? And so that's perfect. I love that.
Yeah.
That's an absolute beautiful Bible verse. I remember reading that and having the same reaction to that. It also reminds, like, this just gets right to the core of everything that we're talking about, the core of all of it. Like, with William Blake, from where, Aldous Huxley got the name for his book that inspired Jim Morrison to call his band The Doors. That famous line from the marriage of heaven and hell, when the doors of perception are cleansed, man will see things as they truly are, infinite. And at the end of William Blake's poem Auguries of Innocence, he ends it with, we are, how does this go again? We are born to believe a lie when we see with and not through the eye, which is born in a night to perish in a night, when the soul slept in beams of light. So William Blake, who had visions all the time, was saying you're not going to be able to see this other world with, like, your normal flesh and blood eye. Like, you're going to have to be born of the spirit. Like, this is a very, like, deep kind of thing that goes right into Christianity. I'm not about being popular. I say how things are. I'm a realist. When you have a spiritual awakening, that means you're waking up to the spirit world. You're waking up to spirit beings. Christ is a spirit being. The Holy Spirit is a spirit being. God is a spirit being. There's all kinds of spirit beings. There's a whole humongous array of everything in the Hindu religion and all of these things going on. Okay. And as more people are waking up and having a spiritual awakening, where this leads people, like, whatever you choose to enlighten you, spiritual enlightenment has nothing to do with spiritual awakening. Spiritual enlightenment comes when you're starting to focus on some aspect of your spiritual awakening that leads you to it. Okay. Like, Jim Morrison for me was a lot of, like, in my enlightenment about what spiritual awakening is. And, Jim Morrison was that kind of person. And when the music's over, in the beginning, he's saying, cancel my subscription to the resurrection, send my credentials to the house of detention, that rebellion. And then in the last part of the song, he's like, save us, Jesus, save us. He's screaming it. Persian night, babe. I've seen all light, babe. I've seen the light. Save us, Jesus, save us. We're lost. And he recognizes that we get lost. And that's, that is what it's all about. And, Jim Morrison wrestles with all of these questions. When he's screaming at the beginning of the Soft Parade, you cannot petition the Lord with prayer. It's not meant to be taken solely in what I think is like an ignorant way of, like, that's just the truth or something like that. It's meant to be ironic. It's just all kinds of things that are going on there. Like, this is someone who's probably, among many things going on, trying to convince himself of something that he knows is not true. Like, you do need to pray sometimes. Let me tell you, the spiritual world is just like the world of human beings. There's some people, you trust and you like, and there's some people that, to quote, Richard Pryor, thank God we've got penitentiaries. Okay. So, the spiritual world is like that too. And, your mind, to quote Jim Morrison, is a fragile eggshell. And it's in your mind, where your spiritual awakening is going to have it is going to take root and become very, very powerful. Like, Jim Morrison is someone who experienced, as a shaman, like, entities coming into his mind. And Jim Morrison was at a time in his life where he truly believed in the power of shamanism to heal himself and to heal people, through music and everything like that. And I happen to believe that, if you want to bring God into this conversation, that's a good thing for humanity, because we needed people like Jim Morrison or rock and roll, things like that, to loosen us up. This is the world that experienced the atomic bomb, World War II, world wars. Its asshole was too fucking tight. And we needed to loosen up and get back to celebrating life and everything that's great about it. And the 60s did a lot of that for us. And Jim Morrison, I think, is really great being one of those people. I don't think he was satanic and all that kind of stuff at all.
Yeah, I don't.
And some people, they don't understand that they're very quick to either celebrate Jim Morrison as our big, satanic hero, a la, the whole romantic movement kind of thing. And then there's these Christian evangelists like, the Doors and Jim Morrison, the most wicked band ever. All that's bullshit. That's you can't classify Jim Morrison like in those like small little cages.
Right.
No.
You can't put any of us in our minds in a small little cages like that. That just like limits life into something, none of us has the power to, in the end, we all don't know anything.
Right.
Yeah, we don't know shit. I mean, literally the saying on our show is you don't know what you don't know. And
that's right. The Buddhists are like, the most like the most wise thing you can tell yourself is I don't know anything. Mm-hmm. In the Christian religion, like, we Jesus says like, I'm here to renew your mind. That's one of that's everything going on there in culture right now, like the dangers with AI and all these different doctrines and all this shit that's coming from the hard left and the hard right and all this fucked up shit. That's trying to enslave your mind. Jim Morrison was very aware of this. Like he read Marshall McLuhan, whoever like controls the media, like, controls the mind. Like if he read books today, like, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, he'd be riveted to it. Jim Morrison would just be like, holy fucking shit. Like, look at all this stuff that's just trying to really like, zip up the human intellect.
Right.
Dude.
I mean, it's going down no matter what anyway. So it's like, if unless you have the ability to stop what scares you, say AI, you know what I'm saying? If you don't have that ability, then like, let's just go for the ride and see what happens. You know what I mean? And just pay attention to the good shit.
Yeah, really. Dude,
Yep.
You know what's funny is that I just thought about a weird synchronicity that I had just a few days ago. So I had this weird dream, since we're speaking of the Doors here, I had this weird dream that I was able to take a piece of chalk and draw it on a wall, and like in the form of a door or a portal or something like that. And I was able to like, I was able to just walk through it. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I've heard about, certain magical things of people doing that within, their practices or whatever. And then literally the next day, me and my wife, we watched the new Beetlejuice movie for the first time. I didn't see it up until just a couple days ago, and he fucking drew it. Drew the door with the chalk, and then was able to walk through. So I just wonder, like, do you think that his reason for naming it the Doors, do you think it had any kind of, I don't know, significance in that way? Like significance as in like magical meaning behind it, or what do you think the reason why he called it the Doors?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, he read The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley, and that book he really took to that, and he thought it'd just be a great name for a rock band to send a message, to the audience in the world that, we are going to be the artistic expression of this very strong, deep desire that we all have to know about what it's like to be in contact with this other reality that everybody was discovering in the 1960s. I mean, if someone like me and you guys, this band's called The Doors, like that's already, your subconscious is already like, wow, what's this? I mean, Jim Morrison understood that. He knew Jim Morrison was a master at all kinds of things, how to lure you into his world. His voyeuristic, strange, weird, dark place. Like he was really good about that. And everybody was checking out books by Aldous Huxley and everything like that. So the things that people were into, Jim Morrison was putting out there artistically, like with naming his band The Doors. So, oh yeah, that was definitely like the first, big song, break on through to the other side, dig it deep, straight and wide, punch right through it. You've ever seen the video for that, that like with the dark background and the cool colored lights and all that. Like he's really into it. Like, he's really, you can see like his intensity. Like this person is very, very dedicated to the idea that he's introducing something that's actually like, really sacred in what humanity needs, like through rock music. I mean, rock music has its roots in the primitive. Its basis is like, the slaves, like, in the fields, like, singing to ease their pain. And, all that, comes from, like, the primitivism of Africa and places like that. And of course, all of that ties into pain and everything that Jim Morrison, like, learned from Friedrich Nietzsche, which is a whole different discussion. But Jim Morrison wanted to signal to the world that here's a band that, is going to really punch a hole into your three-dimensional look at life. Absolutely.
Rip that veil off your fucking face.
Yeah,
that's right.
dude.
Wake up. Like, wake up.
I love that he was in his own right a spiritual teacher, and you would look at him and he's a rock star, you know what I'm saying? You wouldn't think that he's a spiritual teacher, and so, like, the teacher will show up when you're ready, and so when you're ready and you're having that awakening, and then you hear a Jim Morrison song, all of a sudden, like with you, it's like, holy shit, Jim Morrison was really on some shit, and he really knew what he was talking about, and he was really getting at the subconscious mind and everything else, to the people that are ready for that, dude. And that's just so cool.
Oh, dude, I'm gonna have to go on Spotify and just listen to all the songs now.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, I'm gonna just listen to everything and just analyze every little thing he says and go, holy shit, just have my mind blown.
He was on some.
Well, you
shit
get this
back
awesome
then.
rock star, this really amazing looking, mysterious person who is like a brilliant poet and lyricist and performer. I mean, he knew everything about poetry and drama. And
he's an artist.
Yes, exactly. He's an artist first, but you get all that, but then you get this whole huge secret teacher side of him. You get this, you get someone who just is culminating, like, all centuries of ideas, that are coming up in who he was and his person and his presence. You get so much more. This person left us. This person was really very generous in what they left us, and the very, like, small amount of time. The only person I can think of that kind of, like, that makes my mind this active is like Isaac Newton. Like, this is a person who discovers gravity, and then someone's like, prove it. It's like, well, I have to prove it, I had to invent calculus first.
Right.
So I invented calculus. I had to do all these other things.
Right.
And then I turned 26 years old.
Right, exactly.
I was a fucking idiot when I was 26, dude.
I don't even know what I was doing.
I remember that's how Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't know if that's like the astrophysicist.
It's so weird, actually. I think I just saw that video less than a week ago. No bullshit. Like, I was on my lunch break and I was like, "Holy shit, dude!" Like, by 26, all of that. That's like a whole lifetime for most people. If
Jim Morrison's the same way.
Right.
Jim Morrison's the same way. He left us a lot of, like, really amazing stuff to get into. That's why, like, No One Here Gets Out Alive is a great biography. It's so much fun. Like, Jim Morrison, he's a lot of fun, man. But it's just so much more than, like, the drug fueled parties and the excess and the arrests and the courts and the sexual revolution and his mysterious death. That's a very small part of who he was, and we got to get beyond that. Look at the richness of this guy.
Yeah, you know what's funny too? Just a little fun fact of the day, since we're talking about the doors of perception. So it was just a couple weeks ago. I love watching all the Marvel movies, like, in order. Like, usually once a year, I'll just watch them all in order. I'm just a dork with that shit. But one of my favorite superhero characters of all time is Doctor Strange. And what's funny is that in the first Doctor Strange book, you know how Stan Lee used to always make those, like, weird cameos in every single movie? Well, in one of the cameos for Doctor Strange, it had Stan Lee, and he was just sitting down and he was reading The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley right there, dude. And I was like, nice. How strange in the Doctor Strange movie.
Esoteric knowledge and everything else. Oh my God, that's awesome.
Yeah, dude, pretty cool, man. But look, usually towards the end of every episode, we like to do a tarot pull and do a little reading, and sometimes
on that right now.
Sometimes it likes to match the vibe of the conversation, and you'd be shocked. Ooh. I mean, it usually does have some weird resonance with whatever we talked about. Maybe it's only one thing that, we'll see a description of a word, and I have a book.
The cards never lie.
Dude, they really don't. Like,
dude,
it is
I did
crazy.
A couple card pulls recently just for myself, and the situation I was in, or just kind of the mindset that I was in, and oh my God, dude, it was just like spot on. It was like, it shouldn't even surprise me anymore, but for some reason, man, It does sometimes when it's that spot on.
It
All right,
can't not.
I got the Hanged Man.
Oh,
And it's right side up, but he's hanging upside down. So.
all right. Well, the Hanged Man, it says, when you are suspended upside down, there is time to reflect and see things from a new perspective. The Hanged Man offers the unusual gift of suspended time. His presence is associated with a time period that is meant to help shift your perception of a situation. The Hanged Man is suspended by one leg upside down from the tree of life. His hands appear to be tied behind his back. His free leg is crossed behind the bound leg and appears to be relaxed and resting. He has nowhere to go, so he is able to sit quietly in reflection, which shows up on his face. He is calm, almost pensive, rather than distressed. Yellow illumination surrounds his head, suggesting spiritual enlightenment is occurring during this time of pause. This is a time to surrender, not struggle.
the ball of light sitting behind him. I don't know.
Wow,
I thought that was
pretty
interesting.
A lot of people associate this card with negativity. That's not true.
Yeah, I don't get that. Yeah, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But there is a spiritual little excerpt from it too that it likes to dive into, because it has like the general reading or the love and romance or the career and money kind of meaning behind it. It's an awesome book. But it says unexpected moments of pause can lead to new spiritual insights. Gaining a new perspective on your situation helps you expand your beliefs. Take time to reflect and surrender to the present moment as fully as you can.
No one did that more than Jim Morrison did when he left UCLA. This is someone who he hated Hollywood. He didn't want to go to Hollywood to be an actor. He did not want to get drafted into Vietnam. He very cleverly got himself out of that situation. He thought about going to New York City to be an experimental filmmaker with Jonas Mekas, somebody he loved. He's like, I'm not going to New York City. I don't see myself like taking care of film equipment and all that kind of stuff. And then he was like, what? He got down to the depths of himself and said, I'm going to be a rock vocalist because I've got a mission going on that has to do with shamanism and this secret teacher side of myself. We didn't get into all this, but that's something that secret teachers like Jim Morrison, they have to come to a place in their life where they have to, what the Hanged Man says, they have to pause and they have to go into these parts of themselves and they have to be like, I need to get the courage to be myself and to express this, even though a lot of people are going to be like, this guy's fucking crazy and we need to lock him up. But at the same time, there's going to be people who are going to be freed by this courageous act. So that goes right in line with Jim Morrison.
Well, look, I think that, there's a lot of people, especially nowadays, it seems to be that there's this new age movement. And I don't put that lightly. Like some people say, oh, it's just new age. I'm like, dude, new age is awesome because it incorporates fucking everything rather than just one thing. I don't know why everybody wouldn't be excited about the new age stuff, but neither here nor there. There's a lot of people that are kind of diving into it, whether it be, Wicca or witchcraft or magic or just overall spirituality, however you like to go about it. And there's a lot of really cool things that are going on with that because people are interested in this kind of stuff. And then they kind of, maybe they get a past life regression or a meditation, or they go on, an ayahuasca journey or something like that. And they find out that their life's purpose is almost meant to be one of like a spiritual notion. How can they bring that spiritual part out of themselves and implement it onto their lives? And so, you'll get certain people who are like, oh, I want to look into witchcraft, or I want to look into shamanism, or I want to look into this, I want to look into that. Maybe you want to get hands on somebody and do a little Reiki or whatever the case may be. But I think that what's really awesome, one thing that Jim Morrison realized, one thing that you realize, and I think even now something that we realize is that you can do that in many different ways. Maybe it's writing a book, maybe it's writing a song, maybe it's getting in front of a microphone and looking into it for everybody and not necessarily, just keeping it to yourself and going on this spiritual journey all on your own. Yes, it is on your own, but it doesn't mean that you have to do it all alone. And, somebody like you who has found the path that leads you that led you to kind of this spiritual understanding. And for us, like we talk about it all the time, all the different spiritual aspects of almost everything that we find interesting. We're just like, we got to learn more about it. And I think that it really just involves you immersing yourself into something that you love and, painting the picture. If you got the paintbrush, like what you going to do with it? You can't just sit there and hold it onto yourself. So yeah, man, we really appreciate you coming onto the show and shining a light on Jim Morrison, not CIA agent. Just throw it out there, but yeah, man, we really appreciate that. If anybody wants to be able to find,
we got to dispel that whole CIA myth thing going on. Like,
get the fuck out of here with that. But if anybody wants to be able to find you or any of your work, how do they accomplish that, sir?
www.paulwyld.com. That's my website right now.
Perfect.
And now that the book has found a home and the pandemic is over, I'm working hard with music. So the next task is to find a home for the music and go on forward with that.
Well, look,
now that I've gotten taken to school by Jim Morrison and everything that took him to school, you know what I mean?
Right. Yes, dude.
You just needed that teacher. That's all, man. So yeah, look, we would definitely love to keep in contact with you. Maybe do it again sometime and follow you on your journey.
I would love that.
Yeah, man, we really appreciate you hanging out with us. This was awesome. Like, I love these kinds of conversations. These are great, dude. So yeah, look, I mean, Paul, we'll definitely keep in contact with you and, we'll see you next time. But, yeah, Sean, you got anything else you want to add there, dude?
Dude, you know what? This was great. I wrote down a bunch of the books that you were rattling off, which is impressive, by the way, that you can just remember all of that. But yeah, I wrote those down so I can look for those for myself, and I'll definitely be looking up Jim Morrison up on my Apple Music and just running through them. This is gonna be fun. But
the stormy search for the self is like really fantastic, and it's
the one I wrote down. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right,
cool, guys. Let's do this again. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, man. Yeah, we the same, ditto. Right back at you. But look, if Paul Wyld came here and he taught you anything, it's that you don't know what you don't know. So don't just get weird.
Stay weird.
In a realm where shadows dance with light, through the whispering woods at night, secrets echo through the air, meta mysteries everywhere. Voices drift on winds untamed, words like spells that can't be named. Close your eyes and feel the sound. Journey where no bounds are found. Open doors inside your mind. Leave the ordinary far behind. Colors swirl and stars align. In the meta mysteries you'll find. Power rise from the depths of crystal skies, where the unseen comes to play. Lost in dreams, you lose the day, chanting truth